Okay, so I thought I was going to talk a little bit about populism today, because it's a word that's been thrown around a lot, and it's currently the favorite word of the mainstream media. They use it like an insult, and it's a very convenient word to use by stupid people in an attempt to sound smart. They think that they're aligning themselves with the views of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, who thought that the unwashed simpletons that constitute the people were unfit to make any decisions of great importance for the nation. Wise philosophers who'd rather have the people up on top with greater knowledge calling the shots because they consider the people of Athens to be so easily manipulated, ignorant, and impressionable. That might have been true during that period of time, but I would argue that it isn't today. We've had an attorney general in Sweden who thought that you can overdose on weed. That should really tell you something. Most teenagers even know that that's bullshit, and teenagers are retarded. Her status in our government proved absolutely nothing about her competence. Between 2006 and 2010, we had an industry minister, later vice prime minister, who lacked any form of post-secondary education whatsoever. And even higher up, we have our current prime minister, who is in fact just a glorified welder.
Here's the wrong paper. Sorry. Har du ett färskt papper? Yeah, before that, I have the old paper.
Okay, I'm gonna give him a break. He also studied 1.5 years at Umeå Institute of Social Science, but he later dropped out before graduating. But he did also study 2 years of economics in high school, so I guess that qualifies him for being one of the top guys who calls the shots in this country. I know I'm being a bit of a dick here and I don't want to rub it in way too much, but this in fact means that our prime minister is less educated than I am. And that is really sad, since my academic history is primarily just a clusterfuck of poor life choices. My point is just that. Today, authority is no longer proof of competence.
Can this same procedure then be done in a pregnancy? Swallowing a camera and helping the doctor determine what the situation is with the...
Mr. Chairman and Representative, it cannot be done in pregnancy simply because when you swallow a pill, it would not end up in the vagina.
Fascinating.
They were most likely correct at the time, but Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle based their views on the relationship between the people and those in power on a relationship that has dramatically changed when it comes to being able to educate yourself and acquiring knowledge. You no longer have much of an excuse in the developed world to be uneducated, while in ancient Greece it would be way more forgivable if you were. But I think that this archaic idea even today describes our political elite's views of the citizen and also the views of the mainstream media which panders to them. Go to work, pay your bills, and leave the decision-making to the career politicians who are completely separated from the reality you see every morning on your way to work.
Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
But the great irony in all of this is that the people, now being called populists, have so far been right on pretty much everything they've been saying. First off, populists were right about mass immigration only being an expensive and dangerous shit bubble just waiting to blow up in everybody's face. Which it now has, and most tolerant and progressive political parties are through their actions silently admitting to this. They're tightening border security, increasing deportations, and putting more demands upon immigrants to be able to care for themselves upon arrival. This is a big thing. A couple of years back they would just throw money at them and give them a free apartment. They still do to a certain extent, but it's way reduced compared to how it was before. Populists were right about terrorists and criminals slipping through the cracks by hiding in the stream of refugees. Case in point, the late shit-stain Anis Amri. Thief, drug dealer, and murderer, Amri was responsible for the killing of 12 innocent people at the Christmas market in Berlin last year, and he arrived in the EU claiming to be a refugee fleeing from Tunisia. He applied for asylum in Germany in June 2016, got rejected, as he should, but was unable to be deported since he'd conveniently lost his documents. So this piece of shit lied about his age, murdered 12 people, and was then able to flee unhindered for 4 days through Europe due to the retarded and dangerous Schengen Agreement Treaty. A treaty, by the way, which populists like Madame Le Pen, for instance, wants to get rid of. Populists were all of them right about Trump winning.
Okay, here we are. And which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Of the declared ones, right now, Donald Trump.
The snickering mainstream media got hit by a tsunami wave of voters who had been ignored for years, and they're still confused and crying about how all of this could have happened. They were right about Brexit.
Isn't it funny? You know, when I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
One of the world's greatest nations to have ever existed turned out to be able to handle itself just fine without being micromanaged by a group of greedy bureaucrats sitting in Brussels. Go figure. So-called populists have been right about the risk of radicalization and self-inflicted isolation of Muslims in ghettos all over Europe. Radicalization is on the rise all over Europe's many ghettos. Self-appointed Sharia fashion police make sure to prevent women's liberation and create their own separate Sharia courts, poorly disguised as religious advice boards. They keep women off the street and limit them to their own homes, making the areas free only for men. This is happening in France, for instance. Feminists dodge the topic, while populists don't. I wonder how it feels to be a feminist and realize that the far-right racists are doing more for women's liberation than you are. A lot of people that the mainstream media call populists were right about the fact that a lot of refugees' views on women and gays are incompatible with those of Western society. Despite intensive efforts from both newspapers and politicians to hide cases of migrant sex crimes against Westerners, the statistics clearly show that it's a rise of sexual assaults that has followed in the wake of a flood wave of immigrants and asylum seekers coming from cultures where sexual violence is viewed as a banality. Alright, let's continue. They were also right about there having been no hacking of electoral machines during the US election. There is no credible evidence presented by any intelligence agency proving that claim either. There is, though, overwhelming evidence proving that there are butthurt losers with tinfoil hats everywhere. Populists seem so far to be right about the inevitable and well-needed fall of the European Union, which has already, even without the Le Pen victory, begun to break apart. Losing France would just pull off the band-aid quicker.
Moi je vous le dis, nous souhaitons retrouver nos frontières nationales. Nous n'avons pas confiance dans les frontières de l'Europe qui sont une véritable passoire. Aujourd'hui, les frontières françaises sont à nouveau contrôlées de manière temporaire. Eh bien, nous ferons tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour qu'elles soient contrôlées de manière absolument définitive.
And they have also been right in saying that if the elite ignores the people and lets them suffer the effects of their irresponsible politics in these sick social experiments, the people will rise up and get these leaders out of office. This is already happening all over the EU. No one is talking about those currently in office. Everybody is only talking about those who can win or have already won and what they're going to do when they're put in office. Do you really think that anybody with even half a brain is in love with the idea in Sweden of having 4 more years of our current government? Everybody is only talking about what they think the Sweden Democrats could do to fix this complete chaos of a situation. And all of those who use populist as an insult are already preparing themselves by stirring up shit with Russia, and once again spitting on the voice of the people by claiming that democracy has failed just because the silent majority are kicking traitors out of office. Putin has nothing to do with this. He didn't import terrorism to Europe. Putin didn't cover up migrant crimes in order to not feed the far right. He also hasn't accepted bribes from Saudi Arabia, Miss Clinton. A nation which you knew perfectly well during your time as Secretary of State funds ISIS, Al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups. And he also, most importantly, didn't sacrifice Russia's state sovereignty in order to submit and dick fence with Juncker for the freedom to be able to even run Russia with the well-being of Russians first in mind. Putin is extremely far from being a saint, but this Russophobic bullshit seems only like a juvenile distraction from the fact that European leadership have made their own people hate them. And in Sweden's case, it started with the political elite who clearly fucking hates the working class. And as supporters for our Sweden Democratic Party began to increase in strength, so did all other parties' contempt. The working class title degenerated into stupid hicks, but all other parties never challenged the Sweden Democrats. And they never gave a shit about why the working class was leaving their parties. They just held their noses high into the air and refused to have anything to do with the frustrated working class voter who had been hit first and hardest by their moronic virtue signaling. There you have some of that elitism I'm talking about. Take your uneducated ass to work, pay taxes, so that we can fuck around with it, instead of helping your retired mother who is spending the last years of her life living below the EU poverty line. So already now, journalists in Sweden are talking about how Putin is spreading disinformation. And with Putin being the devil, they'll then have an excuse for lacking any real connection with their readers, and having flatlined while trying to find the pulse of the nation and its people.
We didn't ignore the voice of the people and constantly call them idiots. Putin just rigged the elections, just like with Trump.
You see how convenient that is? A majority of our so-called journalists and politicians just recently figured out that a lot of people in other countries think that we are completely suicidal, and that a growing number of Swedes don't feel safe in our own country. Our politicians' and journalists' level of disconnection with reality is just mind-blowing. The two most important questions for the Swedish voter, currently, is about the handling of immigration and establishing law and order. And in recent polls, the populist Sweden Democrats are shown to be Sweden's biggest political party. Take a hint, guys. You neutered hacks at your commie shit-rag newspapers can keep calling people populists all you want. They will just continue being right. Take care of yourself. Bye.